Think about your typical 9 to 5 workday. You do your hours, you put in the pain. As soon as 5 o'clock rolls around, you leave all of it behind you. You just go home, or you go to the pub, or you go to the mall, or you do whatever it is you do once you're just done that 8-hour work shift. That 9 to 5 workday, it's starting to fade away. That's because if you're one of the many Canadians working in the gig economy, the workday may be done, but you're not done working. Before we actually talk about what's great and what's not so great about the gig economy, it's important to define its parameters. So the gig economy is this new workforce of temporary and flexible work shifts. So think Uber, think DoorDash, think TaskRabbit, and I've even heard that owning a property and renting it out on Airbnb is part of the gig economy. So anything that's temporary and it's not beholden to a corporate contract for an extended period of time is basically working the gig economy. Those are the more flagship examples of gig work, but any kind of self-employment that involves short contracts with a variety of clients. So if you're a freelance web designer or you're a freelance writer, kind of like myself, or a graphic designer or whatever your trade may be, then congratulations, you're also in the gig economy. Now, the reason why everybody's talking about the gig economy, especially now, is because almost half of surveyed Canadians between the age of 18 and 34 are currently working in the gig economy or have worked in the gig economy over the past 5 years. So that's a pretty significant number. If you break it down by gender, women kind of edge out just a little bit over men in that same age demographic. There's no surprise around that younger age demographic. I mean, millennials have largely graduated into a world where they're either latched onto this full-time job that just didn't pay that much or just graduated into a scarcity of jobs altogether. So it's really no big surprise that they had to either supplement their income or find something temporary before they landed that really reliable job. And when I talk about these graduates, I'm not talking about graduates from fields that are considered unemployable. I'm talking about graduates that come from financial services, from law, from engineering, the fields that you would imagine people would easily find employment after they left school, but unfortunately that just isn't really the case anymore. You match the scarcity of jobs with all of a sudden a really large student debt load, which is caused by the fact that tuitions have been rising very steadily over the years with no sign of slowing down. You've got a huge mess of just low-paying gigs and high debt servicing and high costs of living, so millennials are kind of stuck in this gig cycle. And the fact of the matter is, those student loans aren't going to wait for you to find a full-time job. You need to get on a gig very quickly after getting out of school, so you don't really have that much time to meander with this employment field and recruiting hell that a lot of people get locked in. I think particularly in the upcoming months with COVID-19 being a factor, but yeah, those payments still need to be made, so you still have to make money very quickly. And that's why it's kind of great that the gig economy is there, but it's a double-edged sword, and I'll get into that. But before I go further, I have to stress it's not just millennials who are finding that they rely more and more on the gig economy. Boomers and seniors are actually relying on it too, either to supplement pension income or because they lost their job or just finding that costs are just getting away from them and they kind of need to increase their income to keep up with everything. So gig work has been an option for them in that regard. More companies seem to be interested in moving into this flexible work arrangement direction. A report by BMO Wealth Management actually stated that 85% of companies surveyed were interested in a more flexible workforce, that they didn't have to commit to these extended full-time job contracts. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how the future of work unravels here. And I suppose that means that companies don't have to really commit to giving their employees benefits or all the other fixings that comes with a full-time gig. So it almost seems like that stable employment with being, with the whole being taken care of by your company is starting to become a bygone era. In an environment where costs just keep soaring and incomes aren't really keeping up, and this is an issue that's impacting all walks of life here, it's kind of great that the gig economy is there to help you quickly gain some fast cash and keep up with these costs. But there are some major downsides to the gig economy. Let's get into some of the reasons why the gig economy can be great and not so great. Let's get into some of the reasons why the gig economy is fantastic. So one of the reasons is you're pretty much your own boss. So there's almost like this rebellious attitude about it where you're not beholden to any corporate overlord and you're not really on anybody's payroll, but you do have a series of clients that you don't want to piss off. So I guess you're technically serving somebody at any given time, but at the same time, if you're not getting along with that client, you can pretty much just walk away. When I was working a full-time gig, I found that there was a lot of things I just wasn't allowed to do, and I get it. The company has their own line to toe, they've got their own image to promote, but now that I'm working freelance, I can pretty much do whatever I want. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's a great way to earn extra cash. So this can be in the form of working a full-time job with a gig on the side or just kind of stringing together all of these gig jobs. So in any case, you're pretty much scaling your own income based on how much you really want to work or how much you can really build that negotiation skill. Also, if you have the skills to find gig work, it can be a great safety net if you lose your job. So in my case, when I was laid off of work late last year, I was able to pick up some freelance writing gigs, and that kind of kept me steady until I found more reliable freelance gigs. I'm still freelancing, but now it's on a more consistent basis, so it kind of feels more like a full-time job at this point. And it doesn't just have to be with freelance writing. You can use any skill that you have, or even if you just have a car and want to drive for Uber, or if you have a bike and you want to do Fedora, there's pretty much something there for everyone. Which brings me to my next point. The gig economy has a very low barrier to entry. You obviously don't need a degree to drive for Uber. You don't need a PhD to deliver food. So for that, you can actually just get started on in the gig economy as soon as possible. There might be some training required, say if you're a working TaskRabbit and you have a very specific skill set gig, but other than that, you're pretty much good to go. Other more freelance gigs, obviously if you want to be a freelance graphic designer or a freelance web designer, you need skills in those areas, but I'm assuming that if you're not good at designing websites, you're not going to try to pursue that career. So you just find something that's geared towards you, and you can understand that you're pretty much good to immediately enter into that job as long as you can find the clients. So those are some of the reasons why I like the gig economy, and I think it's great for just a multitude of people. I know everybody has their own reasons for going into the gig economy. A lot of people I speak to actually really like the flexibility. So if they need to go to school in the morning and then their evenings are free, they can pick up a few shifts in Uber. So there's something in it that appeals to everybody, I find. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are a lot of bad aspects to the gig economy, which people are starting to iron out, but I'll just go through the list. The biggest criticism to the gig economy would be the lack of unions. So if something goes wrong on the job, you're kind of on your own, and that's unfortunate. A lot of special interest groups actually have taken great strides to get more rights for gig workers, but we're still in this very precarious moment in gig labor history where we're just starting to claw back some of those rights and just trying to navigate when these injustices happen and what our recourse towards that is. One of the issues I found is that sometimes Uber drivers, or maybe not specific to Uber, but just these ride-sharing apps or these delivery apps, sometimes when you're working with an app, you can be deactivated for reasons beyond your control. So if that's your sole form of income and night and day, all of a sudden you're deactivated, all of a sudden you're cut off from your income, and it's on you to actually appeal to be reactivated. So that can probably be a lengthy process. I haven't actually gone through it myself, so I don't know how it goes, but it's a frustration and it is an interruption in income if you have to go through that process. Also, the lack of benefits. So this is kind of a companion to the lack of unions, but the lack of benefits means you have to go deeper into your own pockets to pay for things that full-timers just take for granted. So everything from dental care to vision care, vacation time, that's a huge one, because let me explain to you the process that a gig worker has to go through for vacation pay, or rather funding their own vacations. They have to take time off of work, so that's already an interruption in income right there. And since they're not getting paid for that, they're getting wiped on that account, and they still have to cover the cost of the vacation. So vacations for gig workers cost more than they would for full-timers. So you really have to save up and you really have to strategize when you want to take that time off. And for some people, that's just not an option. It should be noted that for self-employeds, there are a lot of insurance options out there. You just have to kind of look around and do the research into what works for you. But they do cover dental care and vision care and other sort of healthcare packages and maybe even travel insurance, but you would have to look around a bit. This is a scary one. The lack of certainty in the gig economy has a lot of people wondering if it's really for them. So what I mean by lack of certainty is that you might feel good about your ability to, just pound the pavement and get some income going. But if you're an Uber driver and you don't have a lot of riders, or you're a Foodora courier and you can't find those deliveries, or in my case, if I'm as a freelancer, all of a sudden I couldn't find any clients and all my pitches kind of fell down, where's your income coming from? The onus is constantly on you to keep hunting for that next paycheck, and it's stressful, it's not certain, and it can be a little bit debilitating if things don't pan out. Sometimes when a lot of my pitches get rejected, and that's just a regular part of freelance writing, your pitches will get rejected, I start to get a little bit nervous. Another issue with the gig economy is that it can make you more vulnerable to certain economic shocks. So gig workers, sometimes they work paycheck to paycheck, and they can be vulnerable to those shocks. But what I'm thinking is, if you're a full-timer that gets laid off, then you have a record of employment and have been able to more consistently pay into the EI program, so you have less of an issue actually getting that employment insurance. As a gig worker, it's really hard to actually scrape together that record data, especially if you've been working for multiple clients, so all of a sudden that becomes more hellish in nature. On the plus side, if there is a vulnerability or some sort of economic shock, then you're pretty much layoff proof. That's the benefit of being your own boss. But it also means that maybe less clients are very eager to work with you. Also, just gonna sneak this one in here. Tax time, very annoying. Very annoying. Now, when we look at gig workers during the age of COVID-19, where we see this very strong economic shock and their vulnerability to it, they didn't actually apply for, they weren't eligible for employment insurance, but they did actually get Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit, and they did qualify for that, and that has been, so far as this recording, an effective solution to that issue. Problem is, this was never around before, so coming back to that example of the Uber driver being deactivated from the app, or say he gets sick or something, I mean, all of a sudden you're coasting on savings, some of which Canadians don't have, and it just makes you more vulnerable to a sudden downturn in your own personal finances or just a general market downturn. Love it or hate it, the gig economy is just becoming more and more a part of our daily lives. But where does this leave us? I've written somewhat extensively about my thoughts on the gig economy. There's an article that I have on my website called The End of 9 to 5, The Inevitable Gig Economy, which is pretty foreboding and apocalyptic, I guess, is how I framed it. But to be honest, by the end of that article, I came to a pretty ambiguous conclusion. I see the gig economy as this double-edged sword. On one hand, it helps you keep your income to some capacity when times are tough, but on the other hand, it's a signal of a less reliable full-time work paradigm that we can no longer rely on. But I kind of found it interesting that, so when I went to gig workers, I was expecting this whole woe is me, if only I could find a full-time job and I would never work the gig economy again. I would just get into that office gig and just coast all the way through till the end of my working career and into my retirement. But what I found with gig workers is that they've actually really embraced the gig economy. They've become very entrepreneurial in their gig worker pursuits, and they've embraced this idea of hustle culture. So they make their own dime working the gig, working as an Uber driver, or if they start their own business. I guess at what point does that kind of merge from gig work to actually being a business owner? But even just starting off in the gig economy, I do find it gives you an entrepreneurial sense that will become very valuable in the future if you do decide to make that major step in developing your own business, particularly if you work as a freelancer in some sort of skill like either writing or web design. And sometimes things that start off as a hobby that kicks a little bit of extra income does become more of a company, and it does expand. So I'm never going to knock the ability to transition from gig work to just running a company one day. It's also forcing people to take on a skill that maybe not everybody really has or is good at, so it can be pretty sink or swim. One huge issue that I want to leave off with is gig work in the age of COVID-19. Now, when gig workers don't go to work, they don't get paid. There's no sick leave for workers in the gig economy, and that's something I mentioned during the bad aspects. But that isn't just a concern for gig workers, that should be a concern for everyone. If somebody comes down with COVID-19 and they feel the need to still keep going to work and hide their symptoms or just try to convince everybody that they're not actually sick, then they have the potential to infect other people. So imagine, if you will, a world where everybody had a full-time job and had those sick leave benefits, and the second they found out that they had coronavirus and stayed home, that means fewer transmissions and definitely a better public health sense. So that's not just for this extreme example of COVID-19, that's just for any illness or any sort of time that these gig workers should have been taking off. There are a few scenarios that I can imagine with the gig economy. So workers become more self-reliant. Like I mentioned, there's a sink or swim aspect to it. So there's almost like this workforce Darwinism. Either people who are really good at the gig economy excel so well that maybe they become their own business owner and then they're the ones that are excelling in their own regards, or they just aren't doing well in the gig economy and they can't find that full-time work, so they fall further and further behind. Maybe this creates more of an income inequality, and maybe it's skills-based, maybe it's resource-based. That said, I think new workers will have to find some sort of way to navigate this. I think there's definitely a lot of resources out there that help gig workers, but we've got a far way to go, and there's a lot of aspects to it that are quite challenging. I'm going to end this video right here because I got to go back to work. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. I've actually written quite a bit about the gig economy, so you can actually see that on my website, stephaniehughesjournalism.com. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. I'm not really sure where on the bar it is. Hit the next video and just start hitting buttons to your heart's content. This is Stephanie Hughes, signing off. This is a great shirt, by the way. I love it.